Well, hello, everyone. I'm Maria Marshall. I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. Welcome to our last webinar of the semester. Our webinar series does take a break over the summer, so it will return in August with great content as always, if I may say so myself. Today's webinar is Measuring What Matters, Linking Community Assets, Vitality, and Well-Being. Our presenter is Dr. Michael Wilcox. He's the Assistant Director and Program Leader for Community Development, Purdue Extension, and Associate Director of the NCR-CRD. He's also going to be joined by two panelists, Zuzana Bednarik, who's Research and Extension Specialist at NCR-CRD, and Jeffrey Walker, who's the Community Vitality Specialist with Purdue Extension. I did want to highlight a great conference or summit that's upcoming and hosted by NCRCRD's Placemaking Working Group. The summit is titled the In Pursuit of Place Summit. This is a hands-on conference designed for both rural and urban placemakers to help shape the future of placemaking. Please visit the conference website for details and registration. That will be in the chat. I would highly recommend the summit. I think it's going to be fantastic. And if you've never been to Lambeau Field in Grim Bay, it's a place to be. It is really a really interesting and wonderful place. So not only will the conference be great, but also the location is great. So I would encourage you to think about going. And with that, Michael, I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate everyone coming to our webinar today. Looking forward to delivering this presentation, Measuring What Matters, Linking Community Assets, Vitality, and Well-Being. This is something that I've been giving a lot of thought to for quite some time, certainly since the center came here to Purdue back in 2020. Maria and I talked a lot about making sure that we were thinking about different things like leadership and civic engagement and health and wellness and community resiliency. And certainly this topic plays into all three of those thematic areas. The goals of this presentation, we're going to talk about the challenge, why we need a shared framework for community vitality and well-being. And a lot of folks on this webinar will say, well, we're already doing this in our state, and that's fantastic. As we'll talk about in a bit, we haven't named community vitality as such until last year here at Purdue Extension. And so I'm excited to think about the opportunities as well as the challenges. I'll be introducing a framework that we posit in a paper that we wrote recently. It's basically bringing some things together like the community capitals and policy systems and environment all under one roof. It should look pretty familiar to most. We'll talk about the baseline. We have the 2024 NCR-Stat baseline survey. Zuzana, Jeff, and DeAndre Malone and I came together and we developed 14 indices out of the survey. The survey is quite vast, and we wanted to help people make some sense of the vast amount of data that was collected in that. And so these 14 indices came out of that. We'll talk about some Indiana results. This is an opportunity to showcase what we did here in Indiana, but it's an opportunity for all of you to relatively easily replicate what we did here for your own state and to look at things comparing, contrasting not only the North Central region, but all four regions in the US, because the baseline survey was conducted in the Northeast, in the South, in the North Central region, and the West. And we've also can look at rural-urban comparisons. And then I'll also talk a little bit today about how do we put these findings to work for extension programming. And of course, you can't have extension programming without applied research. And so certainly some of what we talk about today will be applicable to applied research opportunities. So the source material for this are two PAERs, as we call them, the Purdue Agricultural Economics Report. We authored two papers in the past PAER. One is From Assets to Wellbeing, a conceptual framework for community vitality. And once we framed that, we wanted to put some data to it as good ag economists, if you will. And so we authored How is Indiana Doing Community Vitality and Wellbeing in the North Central region. So feel free to download those papers. I'm not going to get into all the nitty gritty of the papers today just due to the short amount of time that we have. But if you do want to get into the nitty-gritty, those are available for download. And I think Mary's going to throw the links into the chat. So the central question is, how do we move from cataloging community assets to actually measuring and improving community well-being? As a community development extension professional, I always start with the assets. We always start with the community capitals. We start with asset mapping, and that's fantastic. And I think positions communities to do some great things. But at the end of the day, where are we going and how are we going to get there? And how can we maybe follow some paradigms or conceptual frameworks that might be more inclusive within extension across most, if not all, of our program areas versus being very community development centric in what we're doing. So central question, we'll see if I answer it or not today. So we start with an asset-based approach. That's certainly the community development tradition. The community capitals framework is where we always seem to start, if you will, which of course includes 7 interconnected forms of capital. It's rooted in the asset-based community development from Krexman and McKnight back in the day. And we often focus on the triple bottom line and economic outcomes, environmental outcomes, and social outcomes. And quite honestly, community development as an extension program area, we've been quite successful taking this asset-based approach across the United States. But meanwhile, our good colleagues, our brothers and sisters, if you will, over in health and human sciences or family and consumer sciences, they, as of recent, have been really taking a look at policy systems and environment, which of course comes from the socio-ecological model, as I'll talk about in a moment. It targets structural change, not just behavioral change. And there are 3 levers, of course, as indicated in the name. And they've had incredible success with that, especially with SNAP education, which sadly went away. But the vestiges of that, and certainly the impact of that program and the introduction of the PSE model continues to this day as we continue to use that legacy moving forward. But I would argue, as I say at the bottom of the slide, this has been sort of side by side. Community development's doing one thing, HHS or FCS is doing another thing, and we don't cross-fertilize all the time. So we don't synergize our work. And so these papers were thinking about how might we do that? And if we are going to do that, is there a baseline perhaps of information that we could look at to see whether we're moving the needle or not as we implement these different programs? And so I'll start with the community capitals framework. Everyone knows about the community capitals framework, and certainly we lost Cornelia late last year, a huge loss for all of us. But in the spirit of she and Jan and the work that they brought to us, community capitals framework is something that we lean on the daily, if you will. And I always say when we use this, we developed this through Purdue Extension and the Purdue Center for Regional Development. I always call it the contact lens when we go into communities. And I ask community members to put the contact lens in, because everything that you do in your community, you should be looking through this lens of the community capitals and considering the natural, cultural, human, social, political, financial, and built capital that exists in your community, these assets. No matter how small or how large a community is, you inevitably have assets, whether you, initially recognize them or not. Sometimes it takes a little bit of coaching or even coaxing for our community members to recognize that they have assets. But this framework has been very useful and critical, really, to the success of community development extension across the country. Alongside that, as I mentioned earlier, is a socio-ecological model of public health, and shout out to the source and that they did this in purple, Maria and my favorite color. So that's why I chose this one. It also has all the information that we need. But the sociological model of public health starts with the individual, goes to the interpersonal, institutional, community, and then policy levels as well. And really, this helps us as extension professionals and as applied researchers think about the why. Why do things happen in our community? Given a particular health behaviors, let's say, why are we seeing these outcomes in the community, and how can we operationalize this type of framework? And the way that we do operationalize it in practice as of late has been through policy systems and environment, where this might be the why are things happening and why do things look the way they are in our communities in terms of health and wellness, or in terms of community vitality and community well-being. And policy systems and environment gives us an opportunity to think about the outputs and the outcomes that we're striving to achieve, the sort of what can we do in our communities. And so, as I mentioned, policy is, of course, laws and regulations, workplace, local, state, federal level. Systems include networks, infrastructural organizations that connect resources to people. And then we have the environment as well, that economics, physical and social conditions of place. And so, as I'll show in a moment, we created this visual, or this diagram, where how can we take these models and have them lead to community vitality? And of course, if you're going to talk about community vitality, we have to try to define it, if you will. And so in the paper, we try to provide some hallmarks, if you will, of vital communities. We certainly we're leaning on our colleagues at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They just simply say it's the people's pursuit of a shared vision of place. And I really, really love that idea. It's calling out the people that have to be included. It's their pursuit, it's not others. So we start thinking about agency and collective action. And it's a shared vision, which has us thinking about broad-based inclusive participation, which is so important when we're doing this work. The other thing is, as we hear about in community development, we need to be thinking not only of nouns, our assets, but we need to be thinking of verbs. And I'd like to think that community vitality is that verb, if you will. It's the process, it's the engine. And so we say in the paper, community vitality is the dynamic capacity that converts community assets into community well-being. It's the buy-in, engagement, and shared action that let a place adapt and thrive. And here are some hallmarks of vital communities. And I guess an argument could be made that in the communities that you work in, you could hand them this list of hallmarks and see how many of them could they check off. And I think there's some communities that could certainly check off the majority of these, or all of them perhaps, and then there's some other communities that might struggle with doing that. And then we have to think about community well-being. This is like the destination of where you ultimately wind up. And without going on a tangent, I did write a blog a couple of years ago where I posit that the end that we're seeking, or the end goal of community development, needs to be fostering love in our community, and that's coming from empathy and operationalized through compassion. And the end result is love. And while I still subscribe to that framework, I think perhaps a more practical framework is thinking about community well-being. And we can think about community well-being as having a human dimension, an economic dimension, a social dimension, and an environmental dimension. And as such, if we think about community well-being in this way, as our good friend Rhonda Phillips has, many of you may know Rhonda, she's a good friend of ours and was here at Purdue for some time. Thinking about these things, they're certainly directly related to the capitals. They're certainly related to the socioeconomic model. They're certainly related to PSE as well. So this is the diagram that we created. A shout out to Mary Breidenbach here at NCRCRD for taking our convoluted notions that we came up with and actually turning it into something that people can use. I won't go through all of this. Hopefully it's relatively self-evident as you look at the different nodes and the interaction between the nodes and that cycle that we imply in this as well. It goes up to builds up to community vitality, and then ultimately builds up to community well-being. And then, as I'll mention in a moment, there's of course the phenomena of spiraling up as well, which is in this also. So spiraling up, as I mentioned, improved well-being does more than measure success. It strengthens the foundation. That's the power of spiraling up. Stronger outcomes build stronger assets, which fuel greater community vitality, which produces even better outcomes. You can think of this is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, perhaps less detailed as the previous model that I showed on the last slide. But capital's invested, PSE shifts the alignment, or the PSE aligns those capitals, if you will. As such, then vitality grows, and then well-being rises out of that. And as I mentioned at the bottom of the slide, then you go back to stage one again with a stronger foundation, and then you continue through that. I think for us as community development extension professionals, as family consumer science extension professionals, for us as applied researchers, is thinking about how do we help individuals, organizations, associations, communities go through this process and take advantage of the power of spiraling up. I really like this slide. Hopefully there's at least one other person on this webinar that likes this slide as well. But I think practically speaking, if you were going to sit down with one of your extension educators or a community member, this might, especially extension educator maybe from another program area, or a community member that might be hearing this for the first time. This tries to frame the community capitals and PSE sort of linear flow in a different way. If you want to think about it, you can start with asset mapping, the community's capitals framework. That can then lead you to the socioeconomic model, where you can analyze the dynamics between individuals and the interpersonal, institutional, community, and policy dynamics. But then you can go to asset-based community development and actually mobilize people, make sure that you're being inclusive, that you recognize the power structures in place, you recognize the assets that are there, and really activate and mobilize the people through this asset-based community development model. And then ultimately lean on PSE, policy systems and environment, to promote and solidify and sustain the change that you want, that you're striving for in your community. And so in practically speaking, this is what we are advocating for, if you will, in this model. But then how do you then apply this to extension? And I mentioned all four mission areas, so community development, 4-H youth development, health and human sciences or family and consumer science, and ag and natural resources. That's sort of the classic mix, if you will, of mission areas in extension. But in the paper, we posit that we could be thinking about 6 thematic areas as well. And I know every single extension system, whether you're in 1862, whether you're in 1890 or in 1994, you think about your work in a variety of ways. And there's all sorts of different buckets that you can create where you can place your work. I'd like to think, or me and my co-authors would like to think, that this provides another framework for us to consider, perhaps a more holistic framework that helps us operationalize this model with leadership and organizational development, economic resilience and financial well-being, health and wellness, human development and family well-being, community planning and natural resources, and food and agricultural systems. I won't go through all of this. This is in the paper, but we lay out a table which has each of the thematic areas. It provides some examples of extension programs that are pretty prevalent, I think, across most, if not all, of our states. It mentions the connection to the community capitals framework, and certainly that's not exhaustive, but these are like the major capitals that are focused on in each of these thematic areas. It gives you some idea of some PSE examples, if you will, that could be integrated, and then what the well-being outcome or the goal of these programs could be as well. And so this is the first 3, and here are the other 3 as well. I will throw out there just so you're aware, and I meant to have a slide in here and I didn't, and Kara Salazar here at Purdue is going to punch me in the nose when she sees me next. but we have our program, Enhancing the Value of Public Spaces, Creating Healthy Communities. And we took a very similar approach in that the entire curriculum is focused on evidence-based strategies, focused on active living, healthy eating, and placemaking. And within the curriculum, we actually lay out all 7 community capitals, and then it's a matrix of the 7 community capitals and the 3 PSEs, and all of the evidence-based strategies that we discuss in the entire curriculum are laid out in that framework. It's a really, really nice way of looking at the different strategies that you can use in terms of placemaking, active living, and healthy eating. And it helps frame for communities what assets you have to put into play, and then what types of PSE levers you can use in order to put that into practice, if you will. I meant to put a slide for you to look at that, but if you just search Enhancing the Value of Public Spaces, Creating Healthy Communities on the Purdue Extension website, the entire curriculum is available there, and you'll get to see these really cool matrices that we put together showing all the different strategies. And of course, there's action planning and everything else there as well, so you can actually do it in your community. So I wanted to introduce the framework. The latter half of this presentation is really focused on the indices and the innovation, if you will, that we made that leans on our NCR-Stat baseline survey. And so, as I say here, we want to go from framework to measurement, if you will. And it's wonderful that we have this representative household survey. It was done in 2022. It was repeated again in 2024. And we're about to repeat it again here in 2026. For this particular work that I'm going to go through, and I try not to spend time on every single outcome here, but I want to make sure that you're all aware of sort of the power or opportunity for you to replicate this in your own state. In the North Central region in particular, we had over 4,000 households that took the survey. All 12 states are represented. It was about a 20-minute survey. It was online through Qualtrics, and we created 14 indices. Some of these indices are from the literature, and we intentionally place them in the survey, and I'll show an example of one of those in a moment. And then some of these indices, as you'll see, are basically an aggregation of a bunch of related questions, if you will. The survey covers a lot of ground. It's a pretty major survey. It is 20 minutes long. The survey instrument is impressive, I think. We have the survey instrument is available online. The code book is available online through our website, and all of the data is available online as well. And we also have Stata code for you to replicate this. And so it's all like plug and play, if you will, if you're interested. But the overarching survey has all of these different topic areas: demographics and income, workforce and entrepreneurship, caregiving, housing, broadband, migration, civic engagement, community belonging. And it goes on and on and on. It's a really comprehensive survey. We've had quite a few students here at Purdue and elsewhere use the baseline survey data for different applied research projects that they have been pursuing. The great news is we not only did this in the North Central region, but we also replicated this work with our sister centers in the Northeast region at Penn State, in the Southern region with our sister center at Mississippi State, and in the Western region as well with our sister center in Idaho. And so we have what we call the 4R-Stat baseline survey. I don't have my tattoo for that yet, but it's a pretty cool name. And you'd be pretty cool if you downloaded the 4R-Stat data and started looking at this state by state and region by region. So the NCR-Stat baseline survey, it's a representative quota sampled household survey. I won't go into all of this. It's all documented in the things that you're going to download after this webinar. You've got all the information, of course, I mentioned here for the North Central region. It covered all 12 states. Because we are a rural development center, we oversampled on rural. So we have a sample that's about 35% rural, 65% urban. As I mentioned, we did this in 22, and we'll do this again in 2026 later this year, and the data will be available in early 27. When we initially did this, when Zuzana, DeAndre, and I got together, we wanted to look at some data, which I'll talk about in a moment. But across the board, the data is aligned with our three thematic areas at NCR-CRD: resilient communities and economies, leadership and civic engagement, and community health and wellness. So all of those different topic areas fall very neatly and nicely in our thematic areas. Once we had that data, we actually reached out to the North Central Cooperative Extension Association, which is all the extension directors from the 1862s, and we got a small grant from them to create reports. And so we wound up creating a North Central Region report, and then we created a state level report for all of the 12 states, so they could look at a compare and contrast between their state, rural and urban, and the North Central region, rural and urban. And in our proposal, we talk about how this is going to provide for our extension directors and our extension colleagues evidence for priority setting, cross-peer learning, stronger stakeholder communications, a baseline for impact, and a template for the nation now that, as I mentioned, we have collected data in all 50 states. And so this can be replicated nationally for the entire cooperative extension system. Those reports that we created where we aligned the data, as I was mentioning earlier, to the NCR-CRD thematic areas, which are listed in the upper right-hand corner: creating resilient communities, developing leadership and civic engagement, and promoting community health and wellness. We put all of those reports online, so you can download all of them following the QR code or the URL there. And they're interesting reads. It's interesting to see how the states differ and so on. We found this to be very satisfying. We're hopeful that we got pretty good feedback from the extension directors. The NCCEA seemed pretty satisfied with the work that we did, and hopefully they're using that work to make decisions and motivate programming in their communities. But then we got talking about community vitality and community well-being, and we came up with this idea of perhaps, is there a way to regroup the indices that we pulled together, and would they neatly fall into the two categories of community vitality and community well-being? And this is what we came up with, and some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, but these are the how we sorted the indices, if you will, going from the original NCR-CRD grouping to the grouping based on vitality and well-being. So I'm going to give you the Indiana example just to walk you through all 14 indices and show you what we found here in Indiana, our sort of call to action, if you will, for Purdue Extension. In Indiana, our sample included 419 households. You can see the differences in some main measures between rural Indiana and urban Indiana. Rural Indiana having a lower mean household income, lower percentage of folks having an education beyond high school, and a younger population relative to their urban counterparts. And then we begin to go through the data and we look at these different indices. As you'll see on the upper left, I just have it numbered: index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, and I point out whether it's aligned with community vitality or community well-being. I tried to do some color coding here so you could follow along. Some of the scales, if you will, you'll notice are inverted. This is one of those scales which is inverted, and so maximum engagement is at scale 1 and minimum engagement is at scale 3. The community participation or community engagement was looked at across 5 different activities, and so this is 5 separate questions within the survey, which we then pulled together and then calculated a mean across those 5 questions questions to come up with the index score, if you will. This is the one that Indiana sort of wins. We have slightly stronger engagement than the NCR average. And you can see that there's some slight differences between rural Indiana and urban Indiana. And every single one of these index slides looks like this, with North Central region, Indiana overall, and then the comparison between rural and urban Indiana. And then we really wanted to do some decomposition, if you will, to take a look at what was driving the scores. And so you can see in this case, civic engagement was driven, the higher scores were driven by stronger participation in religious and spiritual groups and voluntary community service. And the lower scoring components were weakest participation in community fundraising and in collaborative problem solving with others. And I think this is really interesting information for us to consider as we conceive of new extension programs, or we're going out and doing some action planning. What is it that we might potentially run into, if you will, as you're doing these things? Or where do you see an opportunity to perhaps bolster this? How do we perhaps go into communities and help them better understand what philanthropy looks like? Or how do you collaborate so you can work together and solve problems with others? So that's civic engagement. We've got 13 more to go, and I don't have much time left, and so I'll go through these relatively quickly. But we have community equity, again, across 6 different questions or 6 different areas. Indiana was lagging behind overall in this measure. Urban Indiana was a little closer to the North Central average, we saw a strong agreement that communities provide equal access to education, but we are perhaps not needing to work a little harder on equal employment opportunities for residents of all backgrounds. And you can see here community trust, again, 6 different questions, all different community contexts, if you will. Indiana lagging the North Central region, both in rural and urban Indiana. Highest trust for places of worship and healthcare providers, lower scoring components related to neighbors, retail workers, and co-workers, which is kind of interesting. This trust in healthcare providers is actually guiding some of the work that we're doing now here in Indiana related to telehealth, and how we need to make sure that we build trust in our healthcare providers to make sure that telehealth will resonate with folks and that people will adopt those types of technologies. Institutional trust, we had 3 different institutions: government, news media, and police. Indiana was lagging in this as well. Apparently we trust our police, but we don't trust our local government or news media. And so this is information that you can take with you. And there is some diversity, if you will, in these outcomes across the states. And we do that comparison across the entire North Central region in that original piece that we wrote for NCCEA. Recovery-friendly workplace, we had some questions on that. We've been doing some work in this space. I know this work is vitally important. I know Missouri's got a great, vibrant program, as does Wisconsin. There are other states as well that are working in this space, and so we wanted to be sure that we included this. The numbers are fairly tight here in terms of the indice outcomes. Welcoming community, again, interestingly, we lagged overall the North Central region, but actually urban Indiana was right alongside the North Central region as a whole. Rural Indiana, interestingly, lagging a bit in this space. Apparently we're good, effective at making all residents feel welcome, but then actually actively helping newcomers connect and integrate is a place where we need to concentrate some more time and effort. Community satisfaction, this is the largest gap that we found across all 14 indices. This is where Indiana needs to pick up the pace, and predominantly it's in rural Indiana. As you can see the difference with the urban Indiana right there with the North Central region overall, but really lagging behind in rural Indiana. Some high points are internet and cell phone coverage and access to medical care. We certainly see some differentiation there between between rural and urban. And then some of the lower scoring components will not surprise people: housing affordability and availability, job opportunities, and arts and cultural options. And so the community satisfaction one, notice there are 15 community dimensions connected to this. This is definitely one that you would want to decompose and really take a deep dive into the data and see what's going on there and what the dynamics look like there. Mental health is another one, certainly an area important to me and a lot of my colleagues in the North Central region. Indiana, this is a deficit measure I will throw out there. We're looking at lack of interest in activities, depression, and anxiety. We do have some questions in the survey that are more, if you will, asset-based, and we're hopefully going to be conducting some research soon. Myself, Amber Canto up in Wisconsin, Courtney Cuthbertson over in Illinois, and a few other co-authors are going to be looking at this from a different lens, if you will. But here in Indiana, respondents reported depression and loss of interest less frequently than anxiety. I guess that's a positive outcome. And anxiety and nervousness were reported more frequently than other symptoms here in Indiana. I did want to mention in the upper right-hand corner, I was fortunate to work with Amber, Courtney, and a whole bunch of other great people on the North Central Region Extension Task Force on Rural and Youth Mental Health. And so you may want to download that report. It's a great report with some really interesting suggestions for extension in the North Central region. I wanted to pull this out for financial stress to give you an idea of how we calculated these things. Our financial stress index actually comes from this paper out of the Journal of Financial Therapy. Woke J is now a faculty member here, the first author. He's a faculty member here at Purdue now, and introduced us to this really cool financial stress index, which we added to the baseline survey. There's 9 questions in there. And so we had all the outcomes from all of those. And then the index is essentially a mean across all of those indices. There's not a weight across the 9. They're all equally weighted there. And so you can see what our sort of raw data kind of look, not our raw data, but after processing the data, what things look like in a decomposed fashion across the North Central region, rural and urban Indiana, rural and urban as well. And so we take this sort of raw-ish output and come up with what you've been seeing throughout the presentation. You can see that Indiana is under higher stress than the North Central region, and that is pervasive across rural and urban Indiana. And then you can see the different components that were contributing positively and negatively to that outcome. I want to make sure that I hit all of these. The food security is based on the USDA methodology. You can see that we've got some work to do here in Indiana. And so we do have the USDA food security index in here. Loneliness is another one, as many of you know or will recall. A previous Surgeon General spent a lot of time and effort looking at loneliness. It's certainly an important piece here. This is one of the places where Indiana actually matched the NCR average, but you can see there's quite a bit of difference between rural Indiana and urban Indiana. And this, without measuring it, this may not be very intuitive. One would think in rural Indiana, with the high social capital, oftentimes that you wouldn't be lonely, but with low population density, there can be some real challenges there. So Indiana, we were less often described feeling excluded or left out, but we did describe loneliness and a lack of companionship. Social balance is another one. This is looking at discrimination across 8 different identity dimensions. And you can see that Indiana reported slightly more discrimination than the North Central region. And you can see there's some differences there between rural and urban. And this is another one of those inverted ones where 1 is max discrimination and 5 is minimum. So higher is better. In the higher scoring, least reported discrimination by national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion, although that differed between rural and urban, and then more frequently reported discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and political affiliation. extreme weather events. This is certainly community well-being and environmental. I know all of you have been following along and looking at the upper left-hand corner, following along to see whether we're in well-being or in vitality. We were slightly less concerned than the North Central region, less concerned about soil loss and erosion, more concerned about extremely high temperatures. And then pollution as well, slightly more concerned than the NCR, least concerned about air pollution, more concerned about litter and waste dumping. And you can see that we had 4 pollution types that we were measuring here. And you can see there's quite a difference between rural Indiana and urban Indiana. So again, another opportunity to go in and decompose this index in order to see the different things, how air quality, water body contamination, drinking water safety, and litter waste issues differed between rural and urban. So this is Indiana at a glance in terms of community vitality. You can see we're a regional leader in civic engagement. We're about even in recovery friendly, and we have some areas of concern in institutional trust, community equity, community trust, and welcoming community. And so if you think back to the model that we presented at the beginning of this is areas that we really need to work on. If we're going to foster community vitality, we obviously have some aspects of community vitality that we need to really focus on so we can build the capacity to have the community capitals framework, our asset-based community development, our socio-ecological model, and our PSE work. For that to all work and cultivate community vitality, we need to be thinking about these different aspects and think about programming that we can do and applied research that we can do to figure out how to ameliorate some of these situations or address some of these challenges. And then in terms of community well-being, we've got for Indiana, we've got community satisfaction, mental health, financial stress, food security, and social balance all being areas of concern in terms of community well-being. Loneliness is about the same as the NCR, extreme weather slightly less, and pollution slightly more. And so in the end, I wanted to do this in about 40 minutes, and I'm right at 38:52, so that's not too bad. I apologize if I'm talking too fast for a lot of folks. It's the Italian American and New Yorker in me, but a shared language. I will be going to NACDEP next month, and Jeff will be talking about some of these similar things at NACDEP, and I'll be going to NEA-FCS in September, back to my old stopping grounds in Knoxville, Tennessee, to talk about these findings as well, and these frameworks, and how can we better work together and collaborate. My experience, especially pulling together with my colleagues, enhancing value of public spaces, creating healthy communities, one of the first things that struck us when we were working on that was sort of the culture clash between how community development works and how family and consumer science works. And what we've proven over time is that once you get over that sort of hump of aligning how you talk about different things and align your conceptual frameworks, as we've offered to do here in this presentation, that shared language goes a long way in talking about assets and actions and outcomes across all program areas. And I think that the same can be done with 4-H youth development and ag and natural resources certainly as well. I'm excited that we have a real baseline. I'm excited that we're going to be measuring again here in 2026. When we do measure in 2026, we're adding a little bit more granularity to the data that we're gathering. Our hope is that over time, we're going to get to a point where we will have enough granularity that we'll be able to discern some changes perhaps in regions versus the entire state. We can look at rural and urban right now, but we want to get into a bit more granularity. The other thing is that we have the instrument, we have the questions, and so these indices, those survey questions could be replicated in a local area if you wanted to create your own baseline and then measure those each year. You've got all the questions, you've got everything you need, I think, in order to do a baseline survey and then do this over time to see how you're moving the needle in these 14 areas, as well as the new burgeoning areas that are to come in mental health and other places. And then for us, and here in Indiana, we've got some targets, if you will, and we need to be thinking about how do we foster institutional trust? How do we promote community equity? How do we try to enhance community satisfaction? How do we address mental health issues in our community? And how do we address the financial stress that our residents are facing? They certainly stand out as priorities, especially in rural Indiana. And as I mentioned, coming next, the NCRCRD will field the next NCR-Stat baseline survey later this year. Results will come out in 2027, and I think at least one of our sister centers is going to be replicating this work alongside us as well. And so we're hopeful that we'll continue to generate this data for all of you so you can take a deep dive and inform your extension programs and your applied research programs. And so with that, I want to thank Zuzana, Jeff, and DeAndre for all the hard work that they put into this. You've got my email. Feel free to get in contact with me. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my co-authors, and we'll answer any questions that may have been posed while I was rambling on for the last 41 minutes.
Thank you, Michael. I think you are probably open for questions. We've got plenty of time for people to be able to ask you questions, and the panelists. I know there've been some questions in the chat as well. So please feel free to continue to put questions in the chat. I think Zuzana and Jeff, you guys were going to monitor the chat and start answering some of those questions.
Yeah, I've been responding to the questions during the Michael's speech. There were questions about the definition of rural, urban, and suburban areas. So I provided the response into the chat, and that's we didn't run any CFA analysis. That's the answer for another question. And there was a question whether Northeast region or the Northeast region Rural Development Center also works on the indices. So I responded that we shared the methodology with them as well. So as far as I know, they use the methodology to get the regional level indices. I am not sure about the state level indices. It takes a little bit of time to get the state level indices, so they might not have it now, but they definitely have the coding in Stata, so they can run it whenever they want.
Zuzana, if I may, in terms of the CFA question, I'll just say that I feel like the indices, this is our first shot across the bow. I don't know if it'd be appropriate to say that the indices are in their infancy right now, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to make these indices even more robust and get them to a point where they'd be highly defensible in a peer-reviewed journal type article. At this juncture, we were pulling things together in a highly defensible and I think robust way in order to help our extension colleagues start examining these types of things. But I think there's most certainly an opportunity to go in and apply some quantitative techniques to ensure the robustness of the indices. And so we welcome people taking a look at this and trying to find ways to tighten our indices and make them as useful as possible.
And I see another question, curious, why were some of the indicators based on different scales? Was it due to the number of dimensions for indicators? Yeah, the survey was developed 2 years ago, and the idea to develop the state and regional reports and using the indices came up last year. So we used the questions that we had, and of course, different questions had different scales for answers. So we do not have all the questions and responses unified because it was not possible. But all the indices are grouped by topics, and within each index, the responses are unified. They are the same. I mean, the Likert scale that is used as an answer for the questions included in the index are the same.
Yeah. I see this next question about physical activity, and I know that we did have recreation in the survey, recreation and tourism in the baseline in 2024, and certainly physical activity is something we're working on the 2026 baseline instrument right now, and so this is some great input about introducing a physical activity measure into the survey. No one knows the survey better than Zuzana. Zuzana, do we have a physical activity question in the survey as of yet?
We have the question. We have 10 questions in the outdoor recreation economy, and there is a question about going to the state park or doing outdoor activities. So it's specifically related to the outdoor activities, or at least this type of question we have. We do not have a question related to going to the gym or running or doing different type of physical activities at this moment.
Thank you, Zuzana. The last question, and then I have a question for Jeff. Jeff always loves it when I put him on the spot, especially in front of 100 of our best friends from across the nation. But I did want to mention Yang Cheng was asking about the granularity, and we do not have county level data. We wish we could. In order to achieve a representative sample across the counties, it would require us to be endowed with far more financial resources than we are. And so we've gotten to the granularity of state, we've gotten to the granularity of rural and urban, and we're striving to get a little greater granularity as we move forward. But it's definitely a challenge. Our hope really is to, and Maria can explain this better than me, but to fill in some gaps, right? Just data gaps that are out there by asking questions that aren't typically asked. And so given the resources that we have, trying to get those questions out there, asking them, getting the data out there, and empowering folks to look at these things, look at these questions and the answers that we receive at a minimum at the state level, if not at the rural and urban level. So we are striving for more granularity. This is the first step. Jeff, go ahead, Zuzana.
I would like to add that we have been developing the baseline survey 2026, as Michael mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. And in this new survey, we will ask about the county of the respondent. So we will have the county level information. The drawback of this is that we will not have quotas on the counties, so there will be like 2/3 of respondents from, or more respondents from one county than from the other. But yes, we will have county level information in this upcoming survey.
Yeah. I mentioned Jeff Walker. I wanted to introduce Jeff. He is our community vitality specialist, and so this work certainly speaks to his heart. But he's also the leader of our community vitality endowment work. We received a $5 million endowment last year from the Downing Foundation to do work focused on community vitality. That endowment's in perpetuity. Jeff is here because of that endowment, and so we're excited and very thankful to the Downing Foundation. But Jeff is a former community wellness coordinator, and so he was one of the individuals out in the field working in the SNAP Ed realm. And he also is on a town council. And so being on a town council, having worked in SNAP Ed and being our community vitality specialist, Jeff, I was wondering if you wanted to lend some insights in terms of the PSE work that you've done. I know that you were leading an effort last year when you were a CWC of trying to bring asset-based community development and PSE together, how you see using this sort of in a practical sense in the work that you're doing in the communities that you're serving through the Community Vitality Program here at Purdue.
I think when we're working with our community partners, and as Michael mentioned, come from a practitioner background and also being on the other side of some of the way community decisions are made and discussions that go on in communities. I think blending the asset-based community development model and the community capitals framework into PSE is really important because it brings a lot of different stakeholders into conversations where sometimes we've been siloed when we're working together, when we're working in communities. So oftentimes you have folks, and speaking from personal experience, you have folks working in your local health department or you have folks working in your economic development office. And those two groups of people very rarely get an opportunity to come together and talk around the same table. Even in small communities where connections tend to be fairly tight, it can be a difficult bridge to cross sometimes. So I think as we're thinking about the models we use and having these indices at our disposal, it's a really important way, as Michael was alluding to earlier, of having a conversation across different terminology, across different types of fields. And that has really practical outcomes in our communities because oftentimes these conversations are overlapping. We're talking about things like, in my realm as community wellness coordinator, we had a lot of conversations about walkability or a lot of discussions about access to healthy foods and nutrition. And in those conversations, there's so many different stakeholders to pull in, but they don't know where at the table they have a seat. They don't know where in the conversation their perspective fits in. And so I think blending these different models that have both been proven to be very effective and leading them with the community vitality lens towards that focus on our community well-being as an overarching goal. It's a really powerful way as extension professionals and other partners working alongside extension for us to move the needle in our communities and bring folks together. So we've been extremely excited at Purdue with our community vitality program and the other endowment funded efforts that are going to begin rolling out over the next year, just that we get to bring this model and guidance and these ideas to bear in the work we're doing on the ground.
Thank you, Jeff. I noticed that we have a question. How can Extension track its contribution to improving community wellness indicators? That is a great question and implies how do we find causality in this? Was it Extension really that's moving the needle at the state level in these measures? And I think that would be, you'd have to make some heroic assumptions to say that it was solely Extension that contributed to these findings. This is where I think taking the survey questions and doing a pre-post in the communities where you are doing your work is going to be a more powerful method, probably a more applicable method than using these, if you will. For me, the extension directors wanted us to do this because they saw this an opportunity as a diagnostic, if you will. They wanted to see where their state fit in across all of these different measures. And these different measures are kind of unique, if you will. These are not typical measures that you can just go to the American Community Survey and download what's your community belonging index. You can't go to the census and necessarily download that type of information. But here we're specifically and intentionally asking these questions. And so I think taking the instrument and then operationalizing it within your geographic context would be a much better way, sort of where your treatment is taking place, to look at over time, pre and post, how things have changed, I think would be a better way of doing this. And of course, as we work towards more robust indices, making sure that you're using those and following, of course, all the surveying techniques that you need to follow to make sure that you've got a good unbiased sample is something that you'll want to think about as well. But I think there's a real opportunity to do that. This is one step in that direction to sort of start the conversation and provide a conceptual framework from which you can hang this sort of quantitative aspect on. We have about 3 minutes. Are there any other questions? We have 78 brave people that have hung on all the way to the end, and we really appreciate it. Great. With that, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your interest. Feel free to download the papers. Feel free to download the data. If you do this for your state, send us the report. We'd love to see what you guys do with this. We're really, really excited about this. We think there's a lot of opportunities. And the NCRCRD, our raison d'etre, our reason for being here is to serve you. And so let us know how we can continue to do so in this way.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Zuzana and Jeff. We appreciate this. Was a great webinar, a lot of information. Thank you.